Hello and welcome to this panel from CANIEM. It's organized by the Mexican Publishers Chamber, and basically the name and what we'll be looking forward to is the future and what's in it for the publishing industry. Today, I'm super happy and very glad to have with me Cyrus Keradi, Siddharth Jain, and of course, Nathan Hall. Hi everybody, how are you guys?
Hello.
I will read their bios, and basically what we're expecting is to start a conversation towards what's in it for the publishing industry and what's in the future for us publishers. I know Sid is not exactly a publisher, but he's worked really closely with them and he has a really interesting point of view. So I'm going to start with Nathan. Nathan is Chief Strategy Officer at Beat Technologies and takes responsibility for its expansion beyond the Nordics. Already the pulse with the Scope, Fable, Echo, and Chapter, Beat will soon be adding publisher-backed platforms in a future 4 markets in the coming months to add to its portfolio. Before Beat, Nathan launched the curated Dutch service Book Choice in 9 markets and was Chief Business Development Officer at Denmark's Mofilo, launching 2 further markets. Notably, Nathan was also Penguin Random House Digital Product Director with strategic responsibilities for its award-winning digital portfolio and innovation strategy, working closely with the likes of Stefan Fry, Jamie Olive, Jeff Kinney, and Roland Dahlstedt. Welcome, Nathan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sid. Sid is founder and chief storyteller of India's first story company, The Story Inc., which is India's #1 book-to-screen company with over 150 book-to-screen adaptation deals. He recently launched a boutique film episodic development and production company, House of Talkies, which has a slate of 5 projects in the pipeline. His last stint was at Hotstar.com, India's largest premium OTT platform, owned by Disney. He has worked as a producer in Hollywood and Bollywood since over 15 years now. He's a collector of pop culture memorabilia, shows and speaks at 15 forums a year, hosts a monthly talk series at Soho House, Mumbai, hosts his own podcast show, and is a TEDx speaker. Well, nice to have you, Sid.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Cyrus Keradi is a veteran of the English language book trade with 30 years experience in global sales, marketing, and business development. He has held several international roles with Simon & Schuster, the former Time Warner Book Group, now Hachette, St. Martin's Press, now Macmillan, as well as Penguin Random House, US, where he is responsible for the international business. He leads a team with sales officers through the world, working closely with its partners and sisters companies to maximize the sales of PRH print and digital editions in all export markets. Cyrus is based in the New York City area. Hi, Cyrus.
Hi, Diego. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure indeed to have you all. Well, basically, what I will ask you now is if you have a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves, tell us what's your role right now, and I would like to hand the microphone to you guys. I don't know who wants to start. What about Cyrus?
Yeah, I mean, you had pretty much said what I'm up to, but just a little deeper into that. Yeah, I mean, basically, my team manages a very traditional and also sort of business development area of growing our readership around the world. So we are sales and marketing teams. We are doing this for Penguin Random House US. That is my role, and that's the company I'm working for. As you mentioned, me and my team work closely with our sister companies, so there's a lot of collaboration, particularly with the English language groups. So of course, Penguin Random House UK, Penguin Random House Australia, Penguin Random House India, where we collaborate and also share in distribution of our authors' works. And our goal is to sell books and reach readers in whichever way they want to read books. So whether that's a physical print book and they want that physical print book in Tokyo or Brazil or Argentina or Germany, it's our role to get that book into the hand of that reader through whatever mechanism is available to us. But also, if the reader wants to read the book in a digital form or listen to a downloadable audio, my team and my colleagues at Penguin Random House are responsible for reaching those readers anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Cyrus. Sid, it's please.
Yeah, in the story company, my main focus is taking stories to screen. So it's really how do we take stories from books and make them into movies and episodic shows for OTT, television. It's been a very neglected market as a source of stories, which is publishing in India. So I think in the last 3 years, we've made some good progress. And the goal is to keep pushing those stories towards screen. And now, audio, which is a very exciting format that's gaining momentum in India. So that's really my focus. And what we also do, because we are more like a story company, we not only help books get selected by producers, but we also get them developed and also get them produced, financed, maybe from studios. So it's a complete packaging of a story, converting a story into a project that can get financed and then produced. So that's really the focus that I have, and that's the experience that I bring to the table when I work in India.
Interesting, Sid. Thank you very much. Nathan, please go ahead.
Okay, so to dive a little deeper from us, so we build bespoke audiobook and ebook and hybrids subscription services mostly, because that's what the main requirement is in most parts of Europe, but also a la carte. And we do this primarily for publishers to own the reader relationship themselves. And more recently, we're branching out into solving some of the problems for physical book retailers who have a digital proposition as well, to have a deeper engagement with their book buyers. I should stress, when I say subscription, I mean all kinds of subscription. So this could be capped or uncapped. And then our aims really are to provide the publishers, if we focus on that angle, the ownership of that consumer reader dialogue and an ongoing relationship with them, gives them an opportunity to establish their own brand and identity. They make better margins often because there's no one in between. And then they're in full control of the distribution, pricing, the business models, the curation of the content. And then the key thing is they get all the data. So Cyrus, you'll be really aware of all the data that others have that maybe the publishers don't. So we put that back in the hands of the publishers to then really dive as deep as they're capable and carve that data we supply them any which way they want and inform deeper business decisions.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Nathan. So to start the conversation, I would like to go a little bit back. We're going to go and talk about the path forward, but first, as our viewers know, I mean, Sid is in India, Nathan is in the UK, and Cyrus probably is in the US. So it's different, very different realities, I believe, although I'm sure we have some things in common. So I would like to ask you guys, how was the pandemic? What was, if you could sum up what happened in your markets through this very different and new process of the pandemic that we've never experienced before, any of us at least. So how it affected your industries in your territories?
I'm happy to jump in. I just did a talk on this last week. So my business, the business that I run, is outside the US, but I'll speak to a little bit of the US, and then I can go a little bit global too, if that helps give a little context. I think the US has had an extreme share of the numbers of affected COVID-19 sickness, as the UK, of course, as well, and the world, Mexico as well has also suffered. But what we discovered, just bringing it down into sort of publishing, is that there was a lot of pulling and pushing of the consumer. Lockdowns, reopenings, lockdowns again in the US and overseas created what I mentioned last week in another talk, was a hybrid consumer and a hybrid reader. So that really allowed, and luckily, this happened in, if a global pandemic was going to happen, I guess lucky that it happened in 2020 into 2021 and not in 1990, because we had the internet, because we had e-commerce, because we had digital downloadable reading and listening, that we were able to reach readers as they were pushed and pulled in a variety of directions. And our retailers, bricks and mortar retailers, and of course, online retailers, we feel adjusted, not all of them, but adjusted as well as they could, and were very creative in reaching readers, whether that meant, having the delivery of the books at the curbside situation, or they themselves created a better online service, or if that meant just, in terms of having stock and metadata of titles, which we work with many retailers frantically in the early stages of the pandemic. So I can say that the consumer and the retailers were able to adjust so that we were able to give and provide readership something else besides streaming a video, besides video gaming, right? Besides all those consumptions that were available already, we were there too as a form of entertainment or escape during what was really a challenging time for the world. And we found that books provided that escape, provided, for some consumers, provided that brief moment of, reflection away from the headlines. And for us, and I can speak for Penguin Random House US, that allowed us to actually grow. And it was really a true silver lining to the pandemic. And that story echoed, and I'm sure, Sid and Nathan have their own versions of this, but that reflected pretty much globally in different ways, different paths, but very similar situations happened around the world where readers actually grew and the book publishing industry fared well.
Very interesting. It's interesting to hear that readers grew for you in your markets, and that you feel this adaptability to being processed and being able to happen. I don't know if it happened to Sid or Nathan in your markets. Is that something you relate to?
Well, in India, I can share my observations. I think definitely because book sales, India is not a very reading country, I think, compared to the West. And, it's a tough market. It's very fragmented. It's like Europe, different states have different languages. So it's very difficult to sell something across the board unless it's non-fiction in English. But having said that, I think I saw a massive jump in self-publishing. I'd never seen so many Indian authors writing and publishing, so much on their own. And, earlier it was something that they wanted to wait for. They wanted to try all the various literary agents and publishers. And then once they've got a series of 500 rejections, then they would consider self-publishing. But because I think sales slowed down, very few books released in India in the last, I would say, 18 months, I think it kind of pushed authors to become entrepreneurs and then take up self-publishing in a very, very serious way, and then marketing their own books. So there's a massive, I think, interest in that direction. Definitely the adoption of digital reading has picked up. But the other segment, which I think has really picked up in India because of the pandemic, is audiobooks and, audio series and original audio podcasts on the audio platforms, on the audiobook platforms like Audible. And I think that's really a new trend. And, the adoption of I think audio storytelling in India is very, very, it's a natural fit, and it needed an excuse. It needed a push. And I think the pandemic sort of completely, just as it pushed, video streaming, it's really pushed audio streaming. And, people could record sitting out of their homes, and a lot of podcasts and, like allied industries, and, books will benefit the most because, if audio picks up, the books are the first place where someone will go to. So I think between, audio and self-publishing in a country like India, I think I really saw great growth, which is here to stay. And I think that'll really be a great trend for the next few years.
Okay. Well, you just gave us the best entrance for Nathan. So what about audiobooks, Nathan?
Yeah, well, we've so I'll talk from a couple of perspectives. So I'm currently in the UK, but we don't run any services here for a whole gamut of reasons. But we have seen across the board in the platforms that we run, and actually across subscription platforms generally, which is the main consumption model for audio in Europe, that the percentage growth was ridiculous. Like I've seen services with 600% growth on during the core pandemic period. And a lot of that kind of tying into what Sid was saying there will be that a lot of the ways in which consumers acted were really different. So suddenly, like in the UK, we were allowed a certain amount of hours outside to exercise only for a period of time. And people wanted to dual task by doing that, so they would listen to something. So maybe we've got surveys that are showing that would be the moment when people were experimenting with audiobooks for the first time, for example. So there's distinct growth there. And for Beat, that's been great. Then I would think that me as a consumer sat in the UK, I certainly didn't have a great time. I won't name names, but in terms of buying printed books, I would be waiting 6 weeks in a couple of genuine first-hand cases for a brand new title that would be available had the stores been able to open. And that's a reflection on one of the little kind of subpaths that Beat has now had opened up to it, where, as I said at the start, physical book retailers have now come to us to see whether we can fulfill other elements of a digital solution to them. So they may already sell ebooks and audiobooks as a la carte files. But in a lot of cases, what we're finding many big name retailers don't have is an amazing digital solution for how people consume. So how they actually read the file or how they listen to a file. And that's where it starts to get a little bit gray, but I think there's an opportunity for publishers, for retailers, and for companies like us that fulfill these things, where there's no reason why a book retailer can't have all of the elements of a subscription app in terms of how it's read and listened to, and all the stuff that sits behind it in terms of the data that's valuable to publishers and retailers. But the fulfillment and the business mechanic doesn't have to sit within it. So that's a route where we're looking at the moment, and it's a very recurrent conversation. So a book retailer can have all the traits of a subscription-esque app, but without the actual subscription sitting within it. Because that's one thing that technology services are fantastic at building, is the consumer experience, right? So whether that's a gaming app, a movie app, or a music app, they're habit-forming experiences, the good ones, right? And that, for me, has been, when I sat on the other side, it was something that was always kind of missing in book world.
It's very interesting. I hear hybrid consumers, self-published, very high numbers on growth, and but I also hear delays on book and printed book deliveries, and the business shifting to different channels. So I have to ask, what do you think? It's this resilience and adaptability. It comes from the old business. So let's talk about brick and mortar bookstores. Are they really adapting, or are these new businesses, new companies, which are just getting into the market, which, as you said, Nathan, for example, apps and user experience focused products? What is it?
Well, for my part, as I've said, we know there's a few live conversations that are starting to grow, where people have maybe, they went through, I don't want to paint doom and gloom with my couple of experiences of 6-week delays. Of course, that was right at the start, and things improved, as many things improved, right? but we know it's thrown up scenarios where certain major retailers have had issues exposed that they maybe want to future-proof and look at these different avenues. So I think, some of these conversations will stick, other ones won't. Other people will continue to do what they already do very well. Now the world's hopefully realigning itself a little bit better. But like with everything, the working circumstances in companies have been forced to change, and some of that will stay in place because actually people might learn that those practices are better. And I think the same will be reflected in certain practices and processes in terms of how people read, how they're supplied content, delivered physical books. Yeah.
I don't know if I would like to hear your opinion also, Cyrus, on this matter. I mean, you work all over the world and with a very, very big, if not the biggest, publishing company. So what do you see around the world? Is this adaptability happening or just it was just a momentary thing?
Well, I mean, I think Nathan, he provided really good context here and a really smart view of what's happened. He's talking about pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and then what happened right at the start. Those are the three things I think we need to think about. Focusing on the past, what were those structures like, and whether that's Waterstones or Daunt Books or whoever Nathan has had his experience with in the UK. And then right at the moment of, let's talk about whether if you were in China in January of 2020, or if you were in the UK or the US, North America, South America in March through May of 2020, that was a point of inflection of change, right? And that was a barricading moment. So everything from before was the way things worked. Then that didn't work when everything shut down. And all of a sudden, steady demand fell through the floor. And that meant everything, not just books. That meant all product, all supply chains around the world fell through the floor. So what did those people do? What did those retailers do? They barricaded, they shut down, they stopped shipping, they stopped buying, they shut down, shuttered planes, shuttered ships, containers, everything. Then what happened in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, winter in the Southern Hemisphere? All of a sudden, this massive consumption started again. People were home, people weren't going out, a lot more disposable income in their pockets for the most part. Of course, lots of people lost their jobs too, but there was a big amount of people, large amount of people who were at home, still getting paychecks, working from home with kids and so on at home. And they wanted to do things at home. They wanted products at home. And all of a sudden, that supply chain and that consumption shifted back up. And in certain categories, way beyond before the pandemic, with supply chains all of a sudden completely locked down. So this demand supply shifts suddenly happening within the 6-month span is what kind of broke us and what we're dealing with still today. So absolutely, we were going to have 6-week delays. And I'm not saying us, but I'm saying in general, there was a lot of missed opportunities. We missed a lot of consumers, right? So I think that we're still adjusting to that boat that was rocked, and we're still dealing with what's going to happen in the future. And I think, though, that some of the things that have happened are here to stay. I think some of the readers that we've captured, some of the listeners that we've captured that are now consuming much more are here to stay. And I think we'll look at this period of change, at least for our industry, as a pre-pandemic, post-pandemic time.
It sounds very positive, though. It sounds like this change will push us to really to the future, because at least from the markets I work in Mexico and Latin America, I have to say that the publishing industry is a very old business, very slow-moving business, and I believe that the pandemic made us change really quickly in some ways that maybe we would have never changed. It pushed us, definitely. but I don't know, Sid. Basically, we're talking about the publishing industry, but I know that you, I mean, even though you work with publishers, you have the other view. You work with the movie industry, the series, and the and now you're working with audiobooks. If you were to compare, if you were to talk about both industries, did they move at the same speed? Did they adapt it in the same way? What are your thoughts?
I can speak for India. I think every crisis gives rise to innovation. It weakens the old guard and it gives an opportunity to the new guard. I think I've seen that happen in the last 18 months in most industries, and including, publishing and content. And I think in publishing in India, I think there are a lot of newer ways of storytelling that have kind of sprung in the last few months. And I think we'll really see the results of this innovation pan out over the next 12 to 24 months. My guess is that we'll see a bunch of startups which will come in out of from nowhere, which will use this innovative disruption and create a better business model, create better delivery systems, and as Nathan was saying, hybrid models for hybrid consumers. And I think we still have to see the effects of the post-pandemic world on the old businesses, because I think the effects of those will really be seen in the next year. Because I see a lot of newer publishing houses that sprung up, collectives with authors who are tying up with the earlier publishers who have great distribution. So I see more collaboration between the creator and the distributor. I see a lot of cross, synergies that are being put together between, the media industries from the audio video side, collaborating with talent and creatives from the publishing side. So I see a lot of models which never existed pre-pandemic in terms of collaboration and monetization. And I think those will continue this year, and I think all of next year, to really come up with something which will, I think, redefine this business for the next decade. And I'm really waiting to see. But I'm sure that there will be certain services and products that will come and shake, the way monetization was happening in the publishing and the audio business. And I can see that already happening in the audio business in India with talent from the publishing side. So I think the traditional publishers in India will be under pressure, and especially the old guard, not so much the international publishers in India, but the real, the really Indian publishers in India. And I am already seeing that they're feeling the heat. They are not equipped for this. They didn't have the right teams that could advise them how to behave during the pandemic. How do you get those readers or listeners, hooked to their material? They completely kind of stopped their processes, and they were not as nimble as the international publishers were. So I think locally there will be a big churn, and it will benefit either the international publishers or the newer players that will come in the market. But a great, I think great opportunity for change, for sure.
Okay, and it's interesting to hear that you believe there'll be new startups and new players in the business. That's always good. I mean, competitors, new business models, new ideas. So I have to ask you, what do you think are the main trends? I mean, we talked about the past, how it affected some of the things that have been going on, but what are the new trends? It's basically audiobooks, content from movies, having your own e-commerce, a mix of everything. Are some of the models we already have are going to be extinguished? What do you think? What's for the future? The main trends for the industry.
If I can just add very quickly what I've been seeing here, and then I'll pass on the beat to others. For example, here I've seen a lot of stories, being consumed on Wattpad and Storytel in India, which are not the traditional first place to go to for stories. And even for producers, for screen content, we've been now flooded by stories from Wattpad because they never stopped getting stories from the consumer sitting at home, right? So it's been a very different kind of, talent that's come into the mainstream in the last 12 months. So in India, I've seen a great sort of resurgence of that kind of publishing, self-publishing. And, just to tell you, in the last 12 months, 90% of my business has come from unpublished material and, audio material and talent from Wattpad and Storytel. 90% of my business, which was earlier 10%.
Okay. So what do you think that the role for let's say, the establishment for those old publishers that are in the market is going to be in here? Because you're talking about self-published, Wattpad. What do you think it's in it for publishers we already know?
Speed of the bureaucracy in the publishing world in India, at least. It's slower than a government office in India. In India, we are known to be so bureaucratic, but even the publishers are far more slower and sluggish in this country. I don't know about the West. And I think that really, they need to change that. They need to, I don't know, they need to figure out something, because there's something wrong somewhere in the process, in the system. And I think adapting to digital with better, swifter, nimble models like Kindle does, I think there has to be some rethinking on that side.
I see Nathan wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I can jump in quickly. So I completely agree. And I think there's I wouldn't even call Wattpad really an outsider. They've been so established and so successful in the story world for so long. And actually they are a publisher. They're just not a traditional type of publisher. But it's actually, we should talk about the other players that sit cleanly within day-to-day book world, who are also publishing all the time for and they've got into that for various reasons. So whether it be Audible's original content, Storytel's original content, Netflix are moving into audiobooks, YouTube are moving into audiobooks, Spotify have moved into audiobooks, and who knows, probably merge with Storytel and Spotify somewhere down the line. That'd be fun. But there's threats of all kinds here coming from people who are more than capable, as they've shown, of creating great stories. And I completely agree with Sid. It's about speed and agility and the ability to move, and I've sat on both sides. And an old analogy was that we would watch, and not just in terms of creating stories, but the just ability to move in the space. We would watch, when I was sat in a big publishing house, young companies move like a speedboat because they're able to. They don't have the red tape to go through all the time, or thinking about geographic restrictions and all these other kind of things that are there traditionally. And then you'd have the oil tanker that is big publishing house X, trying to navigate its way around the legs of the oil rig, right? And the speedboat's busy moving in between. So there's threats and opportunities coming from all angles. Of course, there's many, many things these companies can't do that a traditional publishing house can. But I think there's got to be, personally, some more experimentation from the traditional publishing houses to adapt to consumer habits a little bit more. So if we're talking a lot about audio today, and I've always heard publishers talk about, their interest in the world of podcasting, right? Something that largely is still treated as a new thing, but really, really old, let's be honest, right? But it's just at the fore at the moment. And they'll be talking about it as a marketing medium and a great place to advertise, maybe, or to expose new authors to new ears and these kind of things. But what I don't hear spoken about very much is how, as a listenable product, what the actual function daily is for a consumer listening to a podcast. It's habitual, it's serialized, it's regular. And for the large part, most audiobooks are still simply a mirror product of a book. They may be 9 hours long, they may be 21 hours long or longer. And that's not necessarily how people want to consume their spoken word, because it particularly if you're a new consumer and you're time sensitive and these kind of things, so half an hour while you're doing something else is nothing. But to look at a file and see it's 21 hours long, that does something psychologically. So I'm surprised that for the large part, there are a few examples why publishers haven't yet experimented with delivering audio books more in line with the mechanic of how podcasts are consumed. It's an old adage, but Dickens serialized in print, and there's just not much of it goes on in audio. And in the meantime, there are huge audio companies, and I'm on about podcast companies, the premium podcast companies, pumping this stuff out at super, super high quality. And you might argue, a lot of that's nonfiction, but a lot of the people creating this content for them are also under contract for books with major publishing houses. And there's a big divergence and convergence at the same time there, that at some point, someone needs the courage to kind of approach a little more. I've seen one example out of Norway, and it was Norway's arguably biggest author, Jo Nesbø, who wrote exclusive content for audio for his publisher, but it was published as per the habits of podcast consumption. But it's literally one example that I know of. So I'd hope there will be more of that, because that's a ripe playing field for publishers. But they got to do it to learn.
Yeah. Well, Cyrus, we really need to hear your input. I mean, you're working one of these large companies that has to navigate, as Nathan said. So what's your view?
Yeah, speaking for the oil tanker, if I may, taking Nathan's analogy, I think these are all wonderful things that are happening. My colleagues and our management are observing all of these wonderful developments and experimentations. I think, Nathan, you said this, there's nothing kind of really new here. We've been talking about digital in publishing for 20, 25 years, right? So the story is like, okay, guys, can you just end the story once and for all, instead of like kind of, playing around with all of these little details and all of these worries? The worries come down to the economics of the business of the big oil tanker, right? And the big authors and agents that are all there as well, making sure that, they've hitched their anchor to the right oil tanker. But, if you look at something like Substack right now, I believe Salman Rushdie just signed up with them, this serialized reading style, which is, I think, Nathan, what you're proposing for audio. I think it's interesting. And I think that there's going to continue to be all kinds of presentations and ways of reaching readers. Podcasts have been around for a long time, really got big, I guess, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now continuing to surge in the pandemic and post-pandemic period. We plan on being there where it makes sense to be. We plan on also being there for the right financial position for our authors and for their legacy, not just to win today, but to win next month, next year, next decade. We're in it for that long haul, as an oil tanker would be. And I can say we also do experiment as well in various ways. We have our own little speedboats. We've invested in Sourcebooks, one of the medium-sized publishers in the US, who are doing lots of different things. We are a 45% owner of that company, but they do whatever they want to do. We own, PRH US actually owns Little Tiger Publishers, children's publisher in the UK. Even though we own them, it's very hands-off. They do things as they need to. They create content on the fly. Very quickly, they can put content in the market, digital and physical, for children, and make that available and pivot to trends. So, it's not like we're just sitting here on our hands, letting the world go by us. We are watching with a very firm focus on what is the best value for our authors.
That
Sure.
brings me, yeah, go ahead, Sid. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to, highlight what Nathan was saying. We've recently experimented. We took the audiobook rights and the audio adaptation rights, and we've converted a 250-page book into 10 episodes of 8 minutes each. And they're like serialized like an audio or like a radio drama, like BBC used to make. So kind of give it like a movie experience on the sound side with dialogue and narration, and yet not make it like a long, boring audiobook, but really make it into short pieces that you can hear, serialize, and then you're done with the season. So we've been experimenting with those things, and they'll release next month. And, so a lot of, those experiments are happening with formats right now. And, we'll know how these pan out.
So I hear, experimenting and entrepreneurship, new companies, but it brings me back to one question that has always been hovering over my mind. As you said, these business models, these audiobooks, digital ebooks, all these business models have been here for decades. Other industries have been able to not only to adapt, but to switch their business model into digital way faster or in a more concrete way. I mean, for example, let's talk about Netflix or Spotify or any of those. I mean, only if you're like really into music, but nobody buys CDs anymore or discs or nobody goes to the store and buys a movie. Why has it been so slow for us publishers and the publishing industry and bookstores to just jump into it? I mean, I hear Cyrus telling us it's been here for let's stop this conversation. I mean, we know it works, but it's amazing, and it goes around in all the markets, right? I believe.
I would say you look at Netflix has been around for decades. Spotify has been around, what, 15 years? It's not new. So I would question, it's not that quick, right? It's not that compared to the age of how quickly, I guess, publishing moved into digital, maybe, but they haven't been super quick either. And they went through lots of iterations to get to where they got to. Netflix started as, DVDs and made the change. So I would still say, yes, publishing can feel slower, but I wouldn't say the others have been so quick necessarily.
We're still
I just wanted to jump in and say that.
We're still on time.
But it's also a function of devices, right? I mean, how many millions of, it's been last few years that, devices have become low cost and accessible, across the world, and the technology that services them. It's also the right time, right?
We have to be patient.
Yeah, and I don't, I would just say, look, I don't know if we want to look at the music industry as a great, shining example of what to do. And there's differences in the media, right? So books, if consumers want to read an ebook, every ebook and audiobook is there. It's not like anything is not available. Exactly what Sid said. We all have smartphones, we all have tablets, we all have whatever that's there. I mean, students, children. So as a member of a big publisher, I can say that if the world had tipped to an 80-20, 80% digital world for reading, that's where we would be. And that's where most of our investment would be today. The world didn't go that way, at least today. Things did change a little bit in the pandemic period, a growth of audio for sure, but we're still in an 80%, at least for Penguin Random House US, 80% physical marketplace. And it's not by our hand, it's the readers who are doing that. And is there something different, and not to belabor this conversation, but is there something different about reading a book versus consuming film versus listening to music? There's something maybe more precious about the three-dimensional object. That is why readers perhaps gravitate to that 600-year-old technology. I'll leave that there for the moment.
I'll give you that. Of course, it is a different experience, and it's a different market, and we're driven by the market. So let's see what happens in the future. Let me jump into a different topic that was discussed at the beginning, and I think Nathan brought it up. Just to change here the conversation, data. I mean, I think for the future and for the future trends, data, not only metadata, but the data of your sales, of your markets, the data that Amazon generates, Apple generates, your own platform generates. It's a key factor. What are your views on how to use it, how to obtain it? Because as Nathan mentioned in the beginning, I mean, not everybody gives that data away because it's so valuable that it's so precious that they don't share it. So how are we going to navigate around that?
Should I start by, I'll just throw in some kinds of things that as a platform provider that we know, just so, the people that tune in get some kind of insight, right? So Cyrus, obviously you're going to have a perspective, so I don't want to put words in your mouth for what you see as the publisher. But from my perspective, largely speaking, the publisher sees their revenue and they see units. From some entities, there may be a little bit more. But for the publishers that have gone with D2C platforms for ebook or audio, regardless of the business model, suddenly they're able to see a little bit more about the consumer. So they may have some demographic information, certainly regional information that might inform where they spend their marketing dollar. They'll know the devices they're on. They'll know the times of day that they listen or read and the regularity at which they log in to listen or read. They will know the completion rates of books. They'll know the various kind of search trends within the app, like which authors, which titles, which narrators. Narrator search has gone up 200%, by the way, are being looked for. They will know the speed at which people read or listen. You know, like, so if they're reading a thriller, like the moments of suspense, the moments where it gets a bit dry, etc. And all of this and many, many more things can be carved in a multitude of ways to start determining things. And I think it's what we've learned as we kind of handwalk our existing partners and potential partners through it, is that different publishing houses will be at different levels of maturity with what level they can kind of start to, what level of information they can start to extract from that data, and then how they act upon it. So in the really mature Nordic markets, for example, people are taking some of the data that can be more marketing centric and informing their marketing spend. They are looking at completion rates of books and really letting that dictate their acquisition strategies. Like, do they really want to buy the next book by the author? Because maybe it wasn't quite as popular as they thought. And then to the complete extreme, and I know this has happened in Denmark, people are actually looking at that kind of reading trend for the speed at which people are reading and starting to craft certain books in a different way. So does it need to be a 500-page thriller? Or actually, could you have the same impact and enjoyment factor over 300 pages and ultimately sell that consumer 2 books? Anyway, that's my starter for 10 on some stuff we see.
Cyrus, Sid, any thoughts?
I mean, look, data, again, it's been very important forever, right? But today, speaking for Penguin Random House, we use it in a variety of ways, not so much for content creation, but more about understanding consumer behavior. And we have data scientists, we have data teams who are constantly searching and understanding data points, billions and billions of data points a day, so that we can price correctly, so that we can adjust metadata correctly, know that the feeds that are going out on a daily basis and weekly basis are up to date, are appropriate for what the reader we're trying to reach. So, data is absolutely crucial to us. And the data manipulation and understanding we have today is very different than even 5 years ago. Again, speaking for Penguin Random House. So, I think it's absolutely crucial for any publisher to be quite well invested in understanding their data, understanding their consumer, understanding their marketplace, understanding what's happening in their marketplace from a consumption viewpoint and price point viewpoint for any format, downloadable audio, subscription plans, if you're participating in that, physical books, ebooks, and so on, and adjusting them dynamically in your feeds, adjusting those prices dynamically, weekly, monthly, accordingly, to make sure, and you can do that with digital, making sure that you have the right strike price for that consumer for that moment.
Yeah, I think that's a key factor that not always it's seen, that you can actually update your data and your prices and your model every day, every week. So you have to move at the same speed as the market and be responsive. I think that's very interesting, and it's very different from the print or physical book market. That's definitely. So Sid, have you seen the use of data in a different way for movies, for other kinds of contents?
Yeah, I have a short story. While data is great for pricing and distribution, in the last 1 year, I have sold the screen rights of 5 self-published books on Kindle, which hit the charts on Kindle India. They were all rejected by the main 10 publishers in India. And then they hit the Kindle charts. I sold the screen rights, and the same publishers went and bought them. And now they're publishing them physically. So, I think data is failing at the gatekeeper level. And, when it comes to, creativity and writers and storytelling and stories. And, I think data is not servicing that. But, it's great for the other part of the business. But I feel, at least in India, the gatekeepers are really very disconnected, and they use data, historical data, for trying to predict what stories will work with the audiences. And they are really failing miserably in India for that, in that department, especially in fiction. So I think data is really important, but I think, instinct will really guide the gatekeepers in a much better way, hopefully.
Diego, can I just make a point? I love that story, Sid. Just first of all, it's amazing. Congratulations on those sales. That's fantastic. And I think we have a very big publishing unit in India that does its best to reach readers. But I'll just say this about India, and not to make excuses. It is a vast marketplace. It is a beautiful marketplace. It is multi-language, multicultural marketplace, which I don't think any publisher has maximized the opportunity. It is there still for a vast growth potential for any major publisher to get. And I think we're just at the beginning stages of doing that. And I think you're one of those innovators that's going to hopefully motivate us to do better.
Absolutely. And I've worked very closely with Penguin India, and it's a delight working with your company.
Nice. Let's see those projects in the future, and good luck to both of you. So here again, I would like to jump into another topic. I mean, the time is running out, so I really want to touch on this, because it's one of the main concerns for the Mexican and Latin American markets. For us, bookstores are not doing well. Many of them are closing. Many of them were really hit by the pandemic. As you know, they had to close. They couldn't deliver. Some of them didn't have strong enough retail e-commerce platforms for them to sell their content. So it was really difficult for them. So what are you seeing on your markets for bookstores? What's the future against this huge? I mean, this is also a discussion, Cyrus, that has been going on for ages, but it's Amazon's and all those large companies that seem to be eating up the market for bookstores. And after the pandemic, what do you see happening to bookstores in your countries?
I mean, you said it. The bookstores that weren't well prepared for e-commerce or did not have any platforms have suffered the most. There's no doubt about it. We have seen some examples of actually in the Nordics and in Benelux areas where there are a lot of independents where they actually survive just through literally going door to door to their best customers and riding their bikes in Amsterdam and making deliveries and all that sort of thing. So there's been some examples of the opposite where they have actually not only sustained their business, but wonderfully grew it a little bit without e-commerce. But those are outliers. I think that there's a lot of damage done here for bricks and mortar retail. And I think for those who weren't there in the e-commerce space, it's an unfortunate space that they weren't in. Some did quickly jump in, and then we have some shining examples in Southeast Asia and the Philippines in particular, where they had very little to no e-commerce. When it exploded, their world exploded and they quickly dove into it. And we have the complete opposite now, where retailers are now literally 70% e-commerce, only 30% bricks and mortar, and closing stores and surviving. The future is still, I don't have the crystal ball, but I think we have gone through, certainly are going through a revolution. And yes, there will be more and more pressure on bricks and mortar. The pressure will be to get online, to be an active participant in your community, to serve your readers, not only with just books on your shelves, but with events, virtual, in store, and with authors, local and regional. To really connect with your readers is really, really important. And we've done and supplied many authors for those things at this time. So I think that would be my advice, if there's advice to come from my area. And in terms of just e-commerce itself, it wasn't just one big online player that grew. There are other big shining examples. And maybe Nathan, this wasn't your experience, but Waterstones.com in the UK did grow significantly during this time with their sales.
It wasn't Waterstones, I should stress, just because I'm feeling like they're getting bagged out. It wasn't them, but another one.
Another one. And I'm not trying to probe, but that's good to know. In the Netherlands, BOL.com grew a lot with their physical sales. The Chinese e-commerce sites grew significantly, JD.com, Tmall. In India, you have your Flipkart as well growing. So there are a lot of examples of just in Germany as well with Thalia, massive growth there for them online. So it's not just one big online player. There's fairly big and medium-sized players around the world who also grew. So sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but I felt like I needed to answer it comprehensively.
On that thought, I mean, I have to thank you very, very much, all of you. I know you're very busy, and well, thank you for your time. Thank you for all your thoughts. I know this will be greatly appreciated by all the members of the chamber and everybody who's watching us. I would just like to remind the people who are watching us that if they have any questions, please do send them through the message service here in the platform or through email, and our panelists will do their best to answer them, and we'll publish the answers to your questions in CANIEM's bulletin. It's been great. Everything comes to an end, so well, I just really thank you all for your time.
Welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure.